to try to keep the spring in there, but we were still learning and, didn't do anything specifically outstanding in the race. And then we got to Batesville and started breaking a Panhard bar or the Heim joints in a Panhard bar. So this happens multiple times before finally, you don't have the internet. You don't have anything. We just kept buying those cheap Heim joints from Larry Phillips and putting them in there and kept breaking them. Well, eventually my dad discovered that there's such a thing as aircraft grade Heim joints. And we got a set of those things, put in the Panhard bar, and we were fixed. Man, now we're getting it. Now we're not breaking down. We're running fast. We're getting us a few wins. It's really exciting time when we can win these late model races. I never dreamed that we would be so competitive so quick.
Partner, are you ready for
so
this
now,
one? I sure am, Kite. This is going to be a great
we're
matchup.
winning races too easily
around
home.
Make the start for the home team,
not saying we win everything,
Perez.
but we win. We always wanted to be
Welcome to this American League matchup
highly
featuring
challenged
the Baltimore Orioles
and highly motivated.
and the Boston
So
Red Sox.
we start venturing out, looking to go outside of our circle of racetracks to face greater competition, and obviously Missouri was the place to do that for us. So there's a dirt track in Bolivar, Missouri, and we decide we're going to go to Bolivar. They've got this big race coming up. And so we want to run this big race. So we figure we better go up there and run this weekly show in order to get a chance to learn the racetrack. So we go up there, and
with 4 different pitches.
all I really remember, I don't remember particularly running great, and I remember taking 2 wreckers. We got in a wreck with some other cars. And I remember it taking 2 wreckers to load the race car. So we didn't get a whole lot, but we learned for this big race that was coming up at Bolivar.
Sometimes you try to make the hitter chase
so fast forward to we show up there for this big race. I think it's a 50-lapper, which is a huge race, long race for us. And there's this driver named Ken Essery who has won so many races up there that they have a bounty on him. Like, I don't know if it's $500 or something like that for anyone that could beat Ken Essery. And so that was something that really struck me as like, man, I know Phillips wasn't racing there, Larry Phillips, but Essery was. And so, I'm really impressed with all this stuff. One of the first things we do, our tires are what you would call mud tires. Most of the racetracks we ran were really wet, kind of muddy type of racetracks. And Bolivar was a dry slick kind of racetrack. Not muddy, not really muddy at all. So I figure out I've got the only mud looking tires around there. So heck, I go over to the Firestone truck. I don't know nothing about nothing. Remember this. I don't know anything. We don't know what we're doing at all. I mean, we're just out here learning. So I go up to the tire truck and I say, hey, I want Firestone. I want a pair of those Firestones for the rear of my car.
Breaking ball is inside.
So they mount them up. I never asked what compound. I didn't even know they made different compound tires. Didn't even know that yet. So we put these fine tread Firestones in the back of his car, and
there goes the runner on the ground.
I don't remember why we had to run the C main, but we ran the C main, and we transferred into the B main. And we ran the B main, and I think they took the top 2 car finishers out of the B main, and we finished 3rd in the B main.
It's hit out towards short.
And so we didn't make it into the big show. So my dad or Shaw goes and talks to, I think, the guy that runs second in the B main, and ask him, if we gave him the money that we won, would he let us take his spot?
The next batter is
and he agreed to it. So we lined up at the back of the A main with my Firestone fine tread tires that I don't know nothing about, all these drivers. I don't know any of these drivers other than I've heard Ken Essery because he has a bounty on him. And we start this race, and it's a long race. And I remember running and running, and finally, and passing cars and passing cars and passing cars.
With that one.
And I remember getting down right on the bottom of the racetrack, and there was a tad of moisture down there, and all these guys were running up there in the middle groove where it was dry slip.
Throws a slider strike.
All I remember is I just kept passing cars. All of a sudden, the checkered flag comes out, and I had won the race.
And now for a look at the home team lineup.
Absolutely unbelievable that I had won that race. I don't even think I knew I was leading. I just was driving as fast as I could go and passing cars. Had no clue.
Let's take a look
that I'd won the race. So they pull me up to the front straightaway and get me out of the car. And I remember to this day the fence between the racetrack and the grandstands. Kids were climbing on it. The fans were packed around it. They were losing their mind cheering, because this little kid had come up there that they'd never heard of and drove from the back to the front.
Inside for a ball.
Won the race. And, I don't remember what happened to Essery, but he didn't, he didn't win this particular race. He may have had trouble or something, but that was the second major milestone of my career, was getting that win. I'll remember it just like it was yesterday. The grandstands going. I had never seen anything like it. It was just it was the biggest thrill of my life at that time. So that was that story. So as we move along into the season, Springfield, Missouri Fairgrounds has an asphalt track.
A bit high.
And so this old dirt car I've got is just beat all to crap and has this body right rear quarter panel is cut out huge because we had gotten this mud tire called a Hoosier Humper, which was 33 inches. It seems like it was 33 inches in diameter, which doesn't sound that tall now, but it was waist high on me. It's massive right rear tire, so the thing had been cut out to run that tire sometimes. And so they're having a big race at Springfield, and we decided, heck, we're winning all these dirt races. It's time to test out the pavement. So we take our old dirt car up there, and it is the ugliest, beat-uppest thing you have ever seen. And we're going to get a taste of asphalt racing. And we roll in there and buy a set of tires, and the promoter was really good about bringing in hot shoes, hot dogs from all over the country. They bring one in every big event and put them up against, of course, Larry Phillips. Well, this particular race, the hot shoe that they had brought in was Donnie Allison. And so Donnie is parked over there in the pits, and he sees me over there in the driver's uniform, and he can't believe I'm the driver. He comes over and talks to me. And to this day, if you see Donnie Allison, when I see Donnie, to this day, the first thing he always says to me, "You remember that time in 1976 at Springfield when you had that car that had that old body, beat up old car with a big old quarter panel cut out?" It just made such an impression on Donnie, but it was a thrill, like no thrill I'd ever had, to be able to talk to Donnie and race against him. Of course, I didn't do any good. The car wasn't any good. It wasn't built for pavement racing, but I was getting some experience. We ran that race. We also ran another race there toward the end of the season where the hot shoe they had brought in there, I think, was Freddie Fryer, the Beaumont Flyer out of Beaumont, Texas. And Freddie was, he was the heat. He was a Southern heat. He won lots of stuff, about everything he ran. So that was a thrill for me to be able to meet him as well. That's kind of the highlights that I can think of at this time. It went from the first couple of races of me not being able to steer the car to us putting power steering on it, to the rear springs flying out of it at Shreveport, to the Panhard bar breaking multiple times at Batesville, to getting that sorted out, aircraft home joints, aircraft brake home joints on the Panhard bar, to winning races, to traveling around, and to getting one of the most memorable wins of my career there at Bolivar, to getting, dipping my toe in the asphalt market. And of course, by the end of '76, that season, I knew that it was time to, because we were already traveling outside of Arkansas, to find the competition that challenged us the way we wanted to be challenged and to make us step up our game. There was no point in continuing dirt racing because the Daytona 500 wasn't on dirt, and that was beginning to be, in my sights. That was my target. At this point, I'm thinking, man, I want to win the Daytona 500. So we start thinking about, the '77 season and building an asphalt car and upgrading this hauler one more time for traveling around. And the '77 season will be an incredibly interesting season to listen to, because the story is very similar in the progression, through the very beginning, the first outings to the end of the season, and where we'd come and what we'd accomplished and the recognition that we were getting. So that kind of wraps up my memories of '76. I know that it was a very challenging season for Larry and my dad and I, because we didn't know anything and we were treading into new territory that with a car that we'd never been before, and we didn't know much of anything about car setup or anything. We just ran the car how it was. We got it from Larry Phillips and just raced it. So looking into '77, we had to determine, what kind of chassis we wanted for a race car, and who we wanted to align ourselves with, as well as who we wanted to build us, engines, an engine. I wouldn't say engines, build us an engine. And one of the things that relationships that we began to develop was, we somehow or another, I don't know how my dad ran onto this guy, but there was a guy in Tampa, Florida, who built engines, and I don't know what his last name was, but my dad his first name was Joe, and my dad always referred to him as Tampa Joe.
Sometimes you try to make
and
That's exactly what you saw right there.
I think that I don't remember if he built us a big block for the dirt car, or if we just ran that Lunati big block all year long. I think that we did, but somehow or another, maybe it was through Joe Lunati, or somehow he learned about this Tampa Joe, and the relationship was in the very beginning stages, at the end of the '76 season, looking into '77. So that kind of sums up and puts a bow around '76. So I don't know if you've got any any thoughts on 76 Barry?
It's just the interesting part listening to this is just the upward trend that you had, like right out of the gate in 74, 75, and 76, and then the thought was pavement racing after that, correct, in the 77?
Yeah, there was, we dipped our toe with the dirt car on 2 races, because we wanted to find out what it was all about at the fairgrounds in Springfield in 76 at the end of the season with that dirt car. But that's, there was no point in continuing dirt racing at the time. It wasn't where I wanted to land. I wanted to land. At this point now, NASCAR was my dream. When I first started dirt racing, it wasn't. It was just go have fun. But the trajectory was so vertical. I mean, it was so straight up from the first race I ran in 74 to the middle of season of 76. Or toward the fall of 76, there was only one thing to do, and that was to build a pavement car and go asphalt racing.
Now, what makes it interesting is it's so much different than modern day. So much different than modern day, and that's where the storytelling part really becomes interesting, because that just doesn't happen anymore. That's not even possible anymore. The way that you started your career, and then boom, just on an upward swing like that, like you said, there was no internet, there was no nothing. You just had to thrash with parts and race.
Yeah, you had to
earn it.
Yeah, you had to trial and error, Barry. I mean, that's just basically, you had to go to the junkyard and get parts and pieces and make what you wanted to make, whether it was suspension piece or adapt power steering onto your car or whatever it was, which nobody ran power steering back then. It was unheard of. But for little old me in 76, it was an absolute must-have. I just, based on not knowing anything, not even knowing the front end settings that were on that car. There could have been some things that were done to maybe made it a little easier to steer, but we didn't even know about that kind of stuff. So, we put the power steering on it. That was an agonizing week of long midnight trying to get all that stuff on there and get the pulleys, make everything work. But yeah, that's what makes this interesting. I really believe that we're putting down, electronically interesting stuff that will be looked back on in the future, as just a wow factor, because racing's not like that today. You start racing today, you start at 5 years old. And nobody thinks you're young child. I was a teenager, and it was blowing everybody away that a driver that young was out there racing, much less, being able to compete with the, with whoever was considered the hot dog at any given time or place. So, everything's different. You just didn't buy your way. There was no internet. There was no way to learn where to find parts or who had parts, or you just made your parts.
Does it, today's racing, obviously you can see on your Twitter account some of the responses you make. Is it kind of demoralizing to you to see the trend of how drivers get into the big leagues now? Is that kind of a concern for you?
This guy can struggle with control at times and is known for a few walks.
Not terribly, because I accept it as a changing of times.
It's too bad he walks this guy. He just lets him get away.
I'm not bitter that it was hard for guys like myself and Rusty Wallace and so many of us that came up in our era. If you were not a Southeastern late model race car driver, you were way far outside the circle of NASCAR and had a major challenge in your hands to get in, to get there and be able to compete. I'm not bitter about it because I succeeded, and I was very lucky to have succeeded and been able to do the things I did. So, I do like seeing, the small handful of racers that still do work on their race cars themselves. Like, somebody I can think of, Ty Majeski.
Bring in a new pitcher. They're going to the
when I met Ty, he was working in the shop at Roush's and racing on the weekend himself, and hoping to get to drive something of Roush's, once in a while. These guys that do work themselves, there are many short track racers that do tons of the work themselves, and these guys are the ones that I keep my eye on as my favorites, because I feel real partial to those racers that have hands-on knowledge and do a lot of their own work, because it's old school and it's not done that way very much. That doesn't stop Joey Logano from putting on a great race, great show. I don't hold it against Joey that he didn't do much work on his race cars. He started racing when he was 5. He was going to school. He was racing adults when he was a kid, and he was going to school, and he's doing a lot of different things. And he's a good kid. He was a good kid growing up, and he was a great racer. And most of today's racers are brought up that way, or brought up through racing on computer, internet, or whatever. And those kind of things. Just a different time today.
All right, so give the race fans the next couple episodes. We're going to move into pavement racing, so we're going to get into the ASA days and things like that. So give them kind of a snapshot what we're going to see in the next couple episodes of the Mark Martin podcast.
Well, the next episode is exciting. This is my first year on asphalt racing, pavement racing. Our first demoralizing experience was taking our race car. We decided to go with Ed Howe and Howe chassis. Taking our car after it was finished to Beaverton, Michigan, to get it set up so he could show us how to set it up. He destroyed us and our dumb asses and lack of knowledge right there. And then going down to Speed Weeks at Daytona. At New Smyrna, and running the World Series of asphalt racing, and the experience that I had there, which was crazy. And then, just doing battles with Larry Phillips and coming up through the ranks, and actually even dipping my toe into ASA, and eventually being able to achieve the ASA Rookie of the Year, surprisingly. And all the massive recognition that I was able to get. The transformation from day one of 77 to the Snowball Derby in December of 77 was absolutely phenomenal. So can't wait for this episode, to do this episode and get it out.
So once again, fans, we're going to get into 1977 next. We're going to go pavement racing, and then it's the time to get into NASCAR eventually in the next batter is startup years of Mark's career in NASCAR. So, Mark, it's going to be fun. We're going to talk a lot of Wisconsin, a lot of ASA, a lot of ARTGO, and a lot of road trips, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Tons of road trips.
All right, race fans. So that is episode number 18 of the Mark Martin Podcast, 1976. Again, make sure to get on markmartinpod.com, markmartinpod.com, and to click and subscribe to all the different podcast players. And remember, give us that 5-star rating.
Thank you for subscribing and listening to the Mark Martin Podcast. Remember to give us a 5-star rating in your app store. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Mark Martin POD. The Mark Martin Podcast is a production of the Accelerated Podcast Network.
1-1 count.
This pitcher rings up K's with great frequency every time he toes the rubber.
Race fans, it's time to buckle in and listen to the fastest hour in racing radio. Your driver is a multi-time NASCAR winner and Hall of Famer Mark Martin. We cover racing, grassroots, history, we bench race, we talk life, and most importantly, we smash the loud pedal. It's time to turn some laps on the Mark Martin Podcast.
Episode 17 of the Mark Martin Podcast, and today we delve into the second year of Mark's career, 1975. Before we have a chance to get after it, make sure to go to markmartinpod.com to get more information on the Mark Martin Podcast, get your listening links and all of that good stuff. Make sure to subscribe on all of the different podcast players, Spotify, iTunes, and many more. Give us that 5-star rating. Make sure to do that. We would appreciate it if you could. But we're going to get into it with the Mark Martin Podcast, year 1975. Mark, this is an interesting year for you, year 2 of your racing career.
Yeah, it really is, Barry. You know, our first year, we knew absolutely zero about racing. And throughout the season, we learned a lot. You know, we raced a lot every Friday and Saturday night, and we learned a lot. Started from zero to where we were at the end of the season, and we, you know, definitely knew that we had to build a new car because we, you know, our first car was built out of the roll cage was built out of black water pipe. The car was really, really heavy. And we knew we could build a lighter car and a much nicer car, workmanship-wise. So we grabbed, you know, my dad grabbed another 55 Chevy out of the weeds, and we did a lot nicer job of gutting it out than we did on the first car. You know, getting all the interior out of it and everything. And we took it to, because the first car was built out of black water pipe roll cage, it was really heavy stuff, and so we took it to Larry Phillips to get Larry to put a roll cage in it. And so Larry put a roll cage in it. He also put tubular upper A-arms on it in the front, and he put Chrysler leaf springs in the rear of it as well. Took the stock leaf springs out and put the Chrysler, because that was the big rage back then, was what everybody was running was Chrysler leaves. So we brought it back to Batesville after he got the cage in it and everything, and we went to work, putting together the car, and it turned out really, really, really nice. Put a really nice orange and white paint job on it, and when the sign painter came to letter it up and put the numbers and everything on it, my dad had written underneath the hood, "We built this son of a bitch. Gimlet-ass Brooks didn't have anything to do with it." So there's a lot of things that could be said about that. First of all, I've never heard that. I assume that is an insult, gimlet, the word gimlet, but I had never heard that word before, and I've never heard it used in any other context since in my lifetime. So I'm not really sure, never questioned my dad about where that came from, but nonetheless, we did build that car. There was an enormous amount of jealousy that went around the dirt track, local dirt tracks where we raced. Because I was so young and having so much success, and we had learned a lot, and we built a nice race car, and my dad was very proud of it. My dad and Larry Shaw, and damn sure didn't want Wayne Brooks getting credit for building that car. Number one. Number two, Wayne had moved up for 75. He was moving up from the 6-cylinder division to the late model division, the V8 class, the late model division. And he had hooked up with the Pouchers out of Carlisle, Arkansas. Tommy Joe Poucher was probably a couple years older than I was, but he was young. He was a kid, getting his driving career started as well. And so Wayne built his car and engine and everything, and actually, I think worked for them, helped them maintain the car and everything. And so Tommy Joe was going to be my number one competition. And if you have rivalries, definitely, if I have rivalries, that was definitely going to be considered a rivalry. So that's kind of the story. If you ever see a picture in my book of underneath the hood of that car, that's what it says. So we had, we started out racing that year, all over Arkansas, but especially at our local dirt track in Batesville and Heber Springs. But we went to Benton a lot, because Benton was, to us, I-30 Speedway as it's known now. At the time it was known as Benton Speedboat. Was like going big time for us. It was like going to a NASCAR race, because Little Rock was big city and lots of cars and people that knew more about racing than locally where we were from. So it was a bigger challenge, and we went down there a lot. Larry Shaw says, rumor has it that we that we won 13 races in a row down there. I would say, knowing Larry, that's a little bit optimistic. He gets kind of excited when he tells stories about our success. But we won a bunch of races down there for sure. We had a lot of battles with Tommy Joe. He was hard to beat. He was a tremendous challenge, made me raise my game, and my dad and Shaw raised their game as well. That year they had built a asphalt track in Stuttgart, Arkansas. So we went over. We took the dirt car, of course. We went over there and raced that a few times. And our rivalry with, I would say, with Tommy Joe was pretty much at its peak. Tensions were running pretty high. It was either he or I that won every race that we ran. And so Tommy Joe showed up with this huge, gigantic right rear tire. I mean, it must have been 15 inches wide. And so that thing stuck out so much because the leaf spring, you couldn't offset it in, so it really stuck out the right rear. And Tommy Joe got that thing up against the fence, and the tire went flat. And so, I'm out there racing, still racing, and he drives in off the racetrack, and Larry Shaw points. My crew points at his, right rear as he's driving by, and he's laughing because he thinks that's funny that they tore up that big old tire. And so Tommy Joe's dad comes over and confronts Shaw. And I wasn't there, of course. I was out on the racetrack, so I don't see it. I didn't see exactly what Mr. Poucher did, but Shaw says he reached up, and Larry thought he was drawing back to punch him, so I think Larry punched him, and of course they had him a little brawl there in the pits. So that's the second fight they had in the pits before I ever got off the racetrack. because they had the big one with Jimmy Lee Grubbs the year before. But this is the same struggles that I had the first year. Maybe a little bit less struggles. There was a lot of jealousy and resentment by the competitors because, I was having so much success so young. We had some issues with, being protested. Not as much as the first year, but a little bit. One of the things was the first night that we ran the car, the upper A-frames, like I said, Larry had built tubular upper A-frames, which was a lot lighter than the stock A-frames. It also turned the ball joint at the right angle because the front of the car was lowered some and the back of the car was lowered some. So it set down really nice. It had weight jackers on the rear leaf springs so you could adjust the wedge a little bit. It was a really nice car. But, like I say, it was a stock frame and everything. But, according to the rule book, the A-frames needed to be stock. So they let us run it the first night, and we took it home and got to looking at the thing and decided that we could take a stock A-frame and hack it up, hack it around where the ball joint goes, hack that end of it off, and hack it off where it mounts to the shaft that bolts to the frame, and it would just slide right over the tubing. So we slapped them on top of there and welded them on so that they looked like they were stock, but they weren't. And we got away with that. That was acceptable. And so that car is the car that sits in the in my museum in Batesville. It's a pretty crude race car, but it is a lot nicer than our first car, and we sure were proud of it. Put a lot of work into it. And that car sits on the trailer that it was towed on. So that car, I have a picture of me standing next to that car in 1975. Halfway through the season, we put a new body on it because, we were pretty rough on bodies, a lot of beating and banging. And so I put all the trophies out by it, and it's sitting on the trailer. I'm standing next to the car and the trailer and the trophies. And that's how it sits in the museum, minus the trophies, of course. But the car and the trailer is on display there. A little bit of a story on the trailer. We built that trailer to pull our first race car on in '74. So it's come time to build a trailer. We're definitely Arkansas engineers, backyard farmer engineering kind of guys. So we figured, well, we need to get some house trailer axles, cut them in the middle and narrow them up so it'll be the right width. And we need to get some angle iron, and we'll frame out, the frame up with angle iron, and then we'll put wood planks down where the car drives up on. And we did that, and we bought some store-bought really nice fenders. Welded those fenders on it, painted that baby hugger orange, and we used it for the first 2 years that I raced. And then after that, I think my dad gave it to Terry Bell, who worked in the office as a dispatcher in a trucking company. And in 2015 it was. In 2015, I had someone tweet me on Twitter and ask me, "Hey, ain't this your old trailer?" It was out in the woods, rusted and abandoned. And I said, "Heck yeah, I gotta have that thing." So anyway, we went and got it, pulled it out of the weeds, and I restored it myself, tore it down, sent it off to the sandblaster, had it sandblasted and powder coated, and rewired it, redid the hubs and everything, and found some tires on eBay that were the correct tire, and it's all restored as well. I'm kind of proud of that trailer because it really shows what level we were on right there. You know, I mean, the only part that was store-bought, I guess, on the thing was the hitch and the fenders. Everything else was just angle iron and wood and house trailer parts that were discarded. So that was pretty cool.
Just off the top of your head, how much money did you put into restoring that trailer?
Oh, I didn't count it, but I'm sure that, you know, I mean, I'm thinking somewhere in the 2000s to have it sandblasted and powder coated. Much more than it ever cost to build it. And then, of course, I bought the tires.
This past season,
you know, got the wheels and the axles and everything painted up and everything. But I was really proud of it, and it gave me a project. You know, I was just a year and a half out of being retired, and I was still hunting for my niche. And so it gave me a project to work on every day. It only took me 2 weeks to do it, and like I say, I did it all myself, other than the powder coating, sandblasting and powder coating the things. So
now, on the last episode, the 1974, you talked about how Larry took this car from 1975 and restored it. He went and found it, correct, and then restored it. It went to the museum?
Yes, it had turned into a Nova. They put a Nova, you know, it's a 55 Chevy, but it turned into a Nova. And, you know, so they'd changed the body on it and raced it some and whatnot. He managed to locate it and, of course, put a new 55 body on it, restored it back. Larry did all the work on that and gets all the credit for it. So, you know, it turned out really nice. The car from 74, Larry tracked it down, and I think he thinks it wound up going to the crusher. So that one didn't exist. But you know, Larry's a dear friend. The story on Larry Shaw was in 1974 when we were building that first race car. We were building it in the trucking company shop. Of course, the doors were open every day, and Larry had a Larry Shaw's Auto Clinic, which is an auto repair shop nearby, and every day when he'd close up shop, he'd drive by and he'd see all this commotion going on around this 55 Chevy, welding the body on it, you know, or welding roll cage and all that stuff, and it spiked his interest. So one day he just wheeled in there, and he's looking around and liking what he was seeing, and he told my dad or my dad probably asked him, hey, would you put that thing on the Sun machine, which was a diagnostic tune-up machine, you know, check the timing and whatever. If you do that every week for us, I'll put your name on the quarter panel. Larry Shaw Auto Clinic. So they made the deal, and of course Larry started stopping in every evening and lending a hand, and pretty soon he was hooked, and that's how he got started in racing, was working on my cars. We worked at night with my dad, all of 74, all of 75, and all of 76. And then at the end of 76, when we were getting ready to go asphalt racing, he decided to sell his business, and my dad hired him full-time to work with me. And because we were going to be doing so much traveling and stuff, no asphalt tracks in Arkansas, so we were going to have to travel all over the country to race. So that's kind of the story on Larry. And for most of you who don't know Larry Shaw, he made it with me until the summer of 78. Decided that it was too much traveling, too hard on his family, too much working day and night, and being gone all the time. And so he eventually started a race car building shop, a chassis shop. So he found his niche in dirt track racing and has built 5,000, around the number of 5,500 dirt track cars or race cars. And that's absolutely amazing. He deserves to be in the Hall of Fame for what he's achieved. But it was crazy how it all got started. That's kind of the story of how he got started in racing. Most people know him now as the premier dirt modified builder in the nation.
So with that said, you got to take some pride in what he's done as a car builder and his career.
Well, I do. Larry is a blood brother of mine, for sure. And I'm so proud of what he's accomplished and who he is. I love him like a brother, and I'm very proud of what he and his family have accomplished in motorsports. It's absolutely amazing that he achieved the same kind of success in racing that I did. A lot of people know a little bit more people know about what I achieved because of NASCAR and the popularity of it, but he achieved the same level of success out of Batesville, Arkansas. 3 guys who didn't know flip, didn't know which end was up, in March of 1974 when we started, building and putting together this race car.
Tell us a little bit about the rest or the remainder of 1975 and just you mentioned I-30, you mentioned 13 races in a row, but let's talk about the season in full as it happened.
I don't have the exact stats of which championships I won. We won multiple track championships. We won a lot of races. Tommy Joe won a lot of races. Nobody else won any races. It was Tommy Joe or I in this division, and it was obvious, by halfway through the season that it was going to be time for me to move up. We raced the same division 2 years in a row. The first year was a real learning curve. The second year, was less learning because we had built a really nice race car. We learned a lot, and I was learning a little bit probably about driving, but it was time to look forward and start plans to build a late model dirt car and move up in the ranks. And that's a really interesting story. I think 76 is more interesting. I remember more milestone events, similar to what I can tell you about my first year in 74. 76 was like that because in 74 I didn't know I could do it. I didn't know I could race. I didn't know I could drive. I didn't have any idea that I could win a race. I didn't know that, that we could win the Arkansas State Championship. There were so many things to talk about. And 75 was more of a refining season. Not as many remarkable milestone achievements because it was the second year in that division for me. And so I don't really remember a whole lot, about that season and that stats. I really remember the rivalry that I had with Tommy Joe Poucher and their family, because it was 2 kids that were, fighting for the same King of the Hill spot. And it was really interesting. A lot of racing going on. I spoke about Larry Phillips, and for for those of you who don't know who Larry Phillips is, he was the god of racing out of Springfield, Missouri, which was 200 miles from Batesville, and really considered by us, by my dad and Shaw and myself, as the hotbed of racing. That's where the stars raced, was up in Missouri, and against Larry Phillips, who was unbelievable. He should be in the NASCAR Hall of Fame. He doesn't get in because people don't know he didn't race Cup. He didn't race the top 3 divisions. He raced. He wound up, after I was long gone, wound up racing the NASCAR Regional Series, late model asphalt series around there, and he won an astonishing 87% of the races he ran. 5-time champion, national champion over everyone in that division. He did the Larry Phillips, which was unbelievable. So when we went to Larry to have a roll cage put in and whatnot, that was, for us, that was building a hell of a sophisticated race car for sure. And that's kind of who Larry is. And for anyone interested, look up, Google Larry Phillips racing, and just find out, because that's kind of a preliminary information that you'll need to know about the next podcast for 1976, because we also had Larry. Larry actually did the chassis for that dirt car, and there's more to come about Larry. Larry played a role in my development later on in 77, and I'll leave those for 76 and 77. Those years are really, really interesting because, I'm moving up each year. For 76, I move up to the dirt late model, and then in 77 I transitioned to asphalt pavement racing, and that's really big. But I had the top 3 wins. Obviously 74, the Arkansas State Championship in the 6-cylinder division. That was like the Daytona 500 to us. Then my next major win that I'll always remember, that's right up there in significance with anything that I did ever in NASCAR, came in 76 with that dirt late model. We'll talk about that next week.
All right, so recapping a couple things, just wanted to go back. Now, you talk about your book. Where can fans get information on that book? When was it written? It looks like, just went and did a quick search. Is it Mark Martin Driven to Race?
Yes.
And it came out, looks like 1997.
Yeah, it's a great book because it has a tremendous amount of my dad in it. And my dad, obviously, you're starting to get the picture of my dad is a hell of a character, and he did a lot of interviews with Bob Zeller, who wrote the book, which is a tremendous writer, did a tremendous job of putting the book together, the photographs, and there probably, to me, there seems like there's more in there from my dad's words from my dad's mouth than there are even from my mouth. Obviously there's a lot in there that I talk about, but the most important part about that book really is seeing the world from my father's eyes, who was absolutely unbelievable. If you read this book, which they're hard to get because they're not published anymore, so they're kind of hard to find. But eBay, usually you can find one on eBay or something. Very very cool stuff talking about the way things were in racing in the 70s, you know, very much like the Wild Wild West. I mean, you know, when it came to, we broke a few laws, let's put it that way. And I was just riding along, of course. I still didn't have a driver's license. So I was just riding along, but we broke some laws along the way. It was it's mostly traffic violations. What had, you know, the story about the haulers is absolutely fascinating to anyone. Our first year, so we built that trailer in '74, and my dad used his Chevrolet pickup, just a, you know, regular two-door Chevrolet pickup to pull that trailer. Well, for '75, he uses the same truck and cuts the frame and extends the frame and makes it a four-door, you know, so that we could all ride to the races together. And of course it had a 454 in it and a Holley carburetor and headers and all that stuff. So, you know, it ran really good. But I'll tell the story of this thing as it transitions. It transitioned from a two-door Chevy pickup truck, half-ton truck, to a four-door with some performance enhancements for '75. And then in '76, it transitions again. And this is where it really gets interesting when we start traveling outside, you know, all over the state and outside the state and all that stuff. It starts really getting interesting. Some of the stories about the trips that we made in the hauler. So we'll get into that stuff next week.
And you're right, eBay is basically it for the book. It's really not in print anymore. 1987, the year it was published. So make sure to check that out. But Mark, wrapping up 1975, any more interesting memories on it?
Well, I'd like to first touch on the book. My son Matt and I have discussed the possibility of doing the ending of the book. You know, it goes up through the first half of my career, and so, you know, we could, you know, I would like to, you know, someday when I've got time to go through it. It takes a lot of time to do that, but I'd like to get with Bones Boucher. You know, Bones is an incredible writer. He did such an amazing job on Bentley Warren's book, and especially Gary Ballou's book. The Gary Heights Shoe Ballou book is the best book I've ever read in my life. And if you haven't listened to the podcast that I did with Gary, you need to go back and listen to that sometime or other, because Gary has stainless steel balls. I mean, the guy was just absolutely unbelievable. Certainly a interesting racer, interesting guy, and actually a hero of mine who made some mistakes that cost him probably a NASCAR Hall of Fame career. So it's very interesting. But anyway, someday maybe we'll do the last half of the book because there's lots of interesting stuff to talk about there.
Yeah, since 1997, there's been 22 years, so there's a lot of more memories to. Well, obviously, the start of your career is very formidable. A lot of really good memories, but there's still 20 years to add on after that.
Yeah, there is. There's a lot of interesting years. 76, our next episode's going to be really fun. 77 is going to be absolutely amazing. 78, 79, 80, 81, absolutely phenomenal time to be in motorsports, and just a absolutely career that just skyrocketed. And, very humbling all along the way. Just I couldn't believe that I was getting to race with legends and
that'll do it.
And even beating them some, or some of them was absolutely phenomenal. What a great time it was, and what a great time in motorsports when you went to the junkyard and you got your parts off of a car in the junkyard and took them back to the shop and made them into racing parts. And this is the kind of thing that we did for many years, and something that I'll always cherish, having the opportunity to do.
So that wraps up episode 2 of the Mark Martin Podcast, year 1975. We'll have 1976 coming up next. But please make sure head over to markmartinpod.com and get more info, and subscribe and give a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast player.
Thank you for subscribing and listening to the Mark Martin Podcast. Remember to give us a 5-star rating in your app store. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Mark Martin POD. The Mark Martin Podcast is a production of the Accelerated Podcast Network. Race fans, it's time to buckle in and listen to the fastest hour in racing radio. Your driver is a multi-time NASCAR winner and Hall of Famer Mark Martin. We cover racing, grassroots, history, we bench race, we talk life, and most importantly,